love it. After growing up north of here and then moving down to Toronto for 10 years, I call them the fun years, age 20 to 30. I moved back to Barrie and decided to make this my home. And this is where I had my professional career and married and have a family.
Amazing, amazing.
And I'm Black.
Oh, are you? Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you've said now we have expert Rose Adams, and I'm like, what makes me an expert? And I thought, well, I have been Black all my life, so that's a long time to have a skill or create a skill. So yes, I'm definitely skilled at it.
Exactly.
So I say that in jest because I do not sit here this morning with any intention of representing the Black community or being a spokesperson for the Black community. The Black community is a misnomer because there are many, many communities, and it's not a homogeneous group. It's not just because the color of our skin is Black that we all have religion in common, or we all have our backgrounds in common in terms of how we grew up, etc. So the Black community is a very diverse community. And we have, for sure, one thing in common, and that is the pigment of our skin.
Yes, absolutely. And the absence of this pigment somehow has allowed myself and a lot of people to believe that there was not a problem, that it has been fixed back in the days where Dr. Martin Luther King was, it's from the 50s, right? Like this problem was ended, shortly after the April 4th, 68, I think, 67. And then after that, everything went better and everything has been fixed now, right?
Right.
And so we believe that it's something of the past decades and that it's no longer happening. And while we would love to think that it's not happening, because of the color of my skin, I don't see it because I'm not facing it. I don't have to deal with this. So what would you say to, first, let's start at the beginning. What would you say that it was growing up in Barrie? Did you grow up in Barrie?
No, just north of here.
North, yeah, exactly. So in Canada, in Ontario, how was it growing up? Was this finished, this whole color of the skin difference, or did you have to deal with those differences yourself?
I definitely have had to deal with these differences I could not possibly count the number of times I've had to deal with, endure, tolerate, whatever adjective you want to use, racism or verb you want to use. I was born in downtown Toronto. My mother was white, my father was Black. Okay. So I'm just as white as I am Black. I'm 50%.
Yeah.
So whereas people have parents with blue eyes and brown eyes, the brown-eyed parents slightly dominant in terms of genetics, so that chances are the child will have brown eyes.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that child, like say it's the dad, for example. The dad has brown eyes, the mom has blue eyes, and the child has the father's eyes. Is that child any less the mother's child? No.
No.
So my mother was this beautiful, petite, blonde woman of English descent, and she was born and raised in Toronto. My father was Black from generations, from Truro, Nova Scotia, which Truro has also been in the news a lot these days.
Yeah.
And his the pigment of his skin was more dominant, and I'm dark. I'm proud of the fact that I'm Black. My first real encounter with racism was probably kindergarten, when I first went to school. Now, I went into the foster care system at a very young age. I became a foster child probably at 6 months of age, and then went from various different foster homes. But at the age of 4, I moved up from downtown Toronto to Simcoe County and lived with a Caucasian family.
Yeah.
When I went to school, kids teased me about the color of my skin. It lasted minutes. It was really short-lived. So the students, my classmates, were not the source of racism. It was teachers. It was other parents who said, oh, well, their child goes to school and meets 30 other kids in their class, comes home, describes all the kids, and then the parents say, because friends have told me this later, well, tell me about, because their parents picked them up after school, tell me about that little Black girl. They didn't say, tell me about that other little girl or that brown-haired girl or the girl with the orange dress. Like, the parents wanted to know, like, who is she? What, because they had never seen me before. Well, chances are they had never seen any of their child's classmates, because it was the first day of school. And yet the parents specifically asked about me. And that's what starts it. That's what starts telling your children, this person's different.
That's right.
That was my first encounter. But in grade 2, actually the summer before grade 2, I had a very, very different encounter with real blatant racism. And my mother, my grandmother, and my 2 sisters, I have one sister older and one sister younger, we went to Lexington, Kentucky. My mother is white, my grandmother's white. My younger sister, although her father's Black, she was also white, or as people say, could pass as white. And my mother's boyfriend at the time was a Black man from Lexington, Kentucky. So we went down there for the summer, and we were living in his home with his family, etc. We were specifically told, when we go outside to play, do not cross such and such a street and go into the white neighborhood. This is the early 70s. So we were told, like, it was dangerous. It's not because we weren't allowed to be there, we'd get hurt. I guess it was the early 70s. They didn't want their 3 Black children playing in a white neighborhood where we were not welcome. And we didn't.
In the 70s, like, it's not that long ago.
Not that long ago. But what happened next was even more astonishing. After living there for a month, some people in that community, the Black community, decided that we weren't Black enough.
Oh.
And we were outside playing when some teenage boys, I was 7, or actually, I had just turned 7. Some teenage boys started throwing Coca-Cola bottles, like glass bottles at us, pop bottles, and chasing us down the street. So my 2 sisters and I'm 7, one sister is 11, and the other sister is only 4. We're running away, and my 4-year-old sister fell. She fell on broken glass and ended up with 120 stitches in her wrist. At the hospital, we were definitely acknowledged by the medical staff as being Black, and are we sure we could pay for this? And so we were treated differently, but the harassment then started by the Black community, to the point where we were not allowed outside the house, not even to play in the yard. It was not safe. We ended up crawling through a back window a few days later, my mom, my grandmother, and my sisters and I, and took a bus. It took us like 3 days or 2 back to Toronto. We actually fled. So racism isn't always what you think. But that was my first encounter. I would like to say that it was my last, but it wasn't. Shortly after that, also in grade 2, for reasons, for no reason other than the color of our skin, my older sister and I were at school and picked on the walk home. And we were held down by a group of boys, white boys, and there were lots of other kids laughing while these white boys held us down and made us eat dog shit and laughed at us, saying, you know, well, that's probably how our skin got that way. And there were adults that could see what was going on. There were lots of other kids around, and nobody did anything.
This is insane. If it happened to you, it happened. We're in Canada right now. Like, it's not like, and it's in Simcoe County. Like, it's.
Well, yes, I can say that that was almost 50 years ago because I'm 56 now, and it happened when I was 7. But things happen all the time, and I started making a list after you and I spoke yesterday of instances that I can remember. And I don't want to talk all about the bad things that have happened because I really want to share with people what they can do.
Yes.
But I think it's important to address some of the things that can happen because much like yourself, you hear this and you feel horrified. And that's a good thing because change only happens when we're pushed to outside our comfort zones. So people need to know what's really going on instead of thinking, doesn't happen here. So one incident I mentioned happened in Lexington, Kentucky, the other in downtown Toronto, and once in Midland, Penetang. But again, as I mentioned, I was in foster homes. So I went from Penetang back to Toronto for a few years, back and forth, other foster homes. But ultimately, at the age of 9, I moved to Penetang full-time with a foster family, the same foster family, and stayed there for the next 10 years of my life. They had no training on what it was like to raise 2 young Black girls, or they had no way to deal with.
This is interesting, and I would like to get to maybe just ask you, you just said there is no training as to how to raise a Black girl.
Mm-hmm.
Just having to think about that you need to have a specific training, because I do believe that back in the 1930s and the 40s and the 50s, parents would need to prepare their child to be Black. They would have to prepare them to how the world would be. And in your case, because these parents did not have the training as to how to tell you, and like, this is so outrageous when you think about that you need to prepare your child to live with the color of their skin.
Oh, Natalie, you make me laugh. You're such a sweetheart. It wasn't the 30s and 40s and 50s where parents would have to speak to their children and talk to them about how to be Black. It's today.
It's today.
It's now. Parents have to sit their children down today. Black parents and say, you know, especially young Black men, son, this is what you have to do when you get pulled over. Right? That you have to, and then this is what you have to do when you get asked for ID. This is what you have to do if you're confronted by the police. It is all about training your children how to not fall victim to excessive abuse. And that goes on now. This is not something that used to happen.
Exactly. Okay, so keep going. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's okay. I want to ask though, how long are we live?
Oh, as long as we have something to say, there is no limit.
Oh, good heavens! Grab yourself a coffee, folks. This is going to be a while.
We can do. Maybe we could aim for like a 40-minute, 45 minutes, something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So I quickly wanted to share some instances of blatant and not so blatant racism that I endured, just so people recognize what racism is, because how can you identify it, call it out, deal with it, if you don't even know what it is? So I made a little list of some things.
Yes, enlighten us.
So my biological mother, who I, as I mentioned, was Caucasian, she eventually married a Caucasian man. And his family, because my mother had no other family, my grandmother passed away. So his family, of course, would invite my mother over for Christmas dinner every year. But she couldn't take me and my older sister. She could only take my younger sister. Remember, the one who could pass as white?
Yes.
Because the family that she married into, not her husband and not his sister, but other family members, did not want Black children in their home for Christmas. So my own mother, we could only spend Christmas with her on Boxing Day. So imagine what that does to your spirit. It hurts. That's the only word I can use, is that it hurts. Because effectively, my mother was choosing a relationship, a romantic relationship, over her children.
So unfair.
My other mother, which is the mother I grew up with the most, which is my foster mom, she absolutely tried her best. She really did. And, but if I would come home from school having been beaten up or teased or, crying like every little kid comes home from school crying over something, I'd get a hug, but then I would be told, and if it was something racial, just don't worry about it. Like, ignore them, don't worry about it. Well, that's not how to empower a young Black child, or a young child, period. The talking, the reassuring, etc. So, but she didn't know what to say. She had never been Black. So if we were teased or bothered or beaten up or, like I mentioned, forced to eat dog shit, there's no calling the principal. Now, to be honest, I didn't tell my parents about the feces incident because I just didn't want to cause problems. And that's a terrible thing when you're the victim of something, but you don't want to be a problem. So you just
don't say anything, and you pretend that it's not happening, because in your mind, and as a child, you don't want to be a source of problems, and you're just swallowing it.
And then, there was the knowledge that by raising these things, I make other people feel uncomfortable. And so I've had conversations now with friends, other family members, about how much we stifle inside because we don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. Recently, and I'm talking 2020, January of this year, I quit my job because of racism. So I was working with a friend, and a new employee that they hired. We were sitting in a staff training meeting. We were talking about real estate and real estate fraud and mortgage fraud and things like that. And the other employee said something about have to be really careful when dealing with those people. And I knew what she meant. Now, she wasn't talking about Black people, but she said, you have to be really careful with mortgage fraud is prevalent with those people. And I let it go for a second, but like literally seconds. And I just thought, no, here's my employer sitting there, didn't bat an eye. So I said, excuse me, what do you mean by those people? To which this woman said, well, Packies. And then the conversation, the training just continued. My employer, again, didn't bat an eye.
Didn't say anything.
Nothing. And I just sat there, and I didn't say anything because I couldn't. And when I mean that I couldn't speak. I was swallowing tears. So if I had said anything, I would have just burst out crying. So it took a couple of minutes, and I got up and I left. I excused myself, went to the washroom, came back, and then I said something. And I was met with, oh, yeah, I was going to say something to her, or, you know, and then she's like, well, I didn't really mean anything by it. It's just an expression. And, oh, I'm not racist at all. But, you know, the fact is, in that particular community, we have to worry about mortgage fraud. And I'm going, I don't care. Use of that phrase in a professional office environment is not acceptable. So don't try to convince me that it was okay. It's not okay. And
especially,
and I'm calm. Like, this is me angry. This is me upset, like right now. So I'm not a yeller.
you're not.
Unless it's my husband, and then, you know, we can yell. But no, we don't.
I don't even think so. I've seen you and your husband.
I
You're
know.
so loving, and
We don't yell.
you're a very calm person.
But nothing was being done. And so I just stood up my ground and I said, regardless of the meaning, and even if you didn't mean anything negative by it, at what point is it okay to call me a nigger? Yeah. And they went, oh, we would never say that word. I'm going, but you just called someone of another race a Paki. Well, how is that different? Well, that's more common. That's more acceptable. Like, no, it's not.
No.
It is absolutely not acceptable. And if I were to let it slide, then I'm part of the problem. So after a bit more of a conversation, I left. They did reach out, both employers, and one listened, one just continued to make excuses. But then I said, you know, this is not going to work, and I quit, which is unfortunate because I needed the job. Last night, my husband and I were talking, and here's the part that it's very difficult for me to admit. And this is where you and all of your audience and everyone else really needs to be honest with themselves. You don't have to say it out loud like I'm going to, but we don't want racism. You don't, your listeners don't. Generally, people don't. But how far are we going to go to resolve it? It wasn't a great job that I quit. I wasn't making a ton of money. What if it was different? What if it was a great job and I loved it there and I was making lots of money? Would I have still quit over that comment?
Exactly. You would.
And I honestly don't.
And as you said, being part of the problem, because if you endure and you don't say anything, you're part of the problem. Yeah. And you're very brave. You stood up for yourself. And it's a very good point. What if it had been your dream job? You would probably still be there and abused. And
I like to think that to be honest, so to answer that question, would I have still quit? Probably not. But I like to think that I would have been far more vocal, and I would have used that issue as a starting point to really address things. Now, nothing had happened before that comment, so it's not like there was a racial problem. But I like to think that I would have been vocal on an ongoing level, not the activist Black employee, but to really help influence change, which then begs the question, then why didn't I stay and do that? Well, there were only 4 people in the office, the two employers, the person who made the comment, and me. So to be honest, I don't think I was in any position to have a long-term impact on their views. That is not to say that they were actively trying to be racist. They weren't. These are lovely people, especially the 2 employers. That's where the line is difficult. Most people think racism is hate.
Exactly.
So when we see what's going on, what's been going on in the news lately, and then what's being brought to our attention,
Yeah.
it's so easy to say that has to stop. But racism is not hate. Racism is a very, very subtle, insidious bias against a race.
And any other, not just the color of the skin, but if we're looking at just our Canadian population, there's 20% of Canadians that have a foreign background. 20%. And I'm in Vancouver. Vancouver is 45%. 45% of people here in BC, no, not in BC, in Vancouver. In Vancouver, it's 45%. In Toronto, it's 39% in the city of Toronto that have a foreign background. So that means that we face that. Like for me, 1 person out of 2 has a foreign background. So it's not just the color of the skin. It can be anybody that comes in. Myself, I consider myself foreign in BC because I'm French, and people do treat me differently, and nothing that you have endured, absolutely not. I do feel very privileged, and I have been treated fairly. It's just that because my language is not fluent all the time in English, people often ask me, "Oh, so where are you from?" And they, at the beginning when I was learning English, people would think that I was not smart because I cannot articulate myself in English very well, and then just give up on having a conversation with me because it takes way too long, because she's got to be dumb, right? Because she doesn't speak the language fluently. So and I feel like it's a very different problem. It's another conversation, and I can't compare this at all. It's just that, what is it with us always trying to identify what is different and who is different, instead of looking for like the parents of the children going to kindergarten that said, "Tell me about this black girl because of the color of her skin," and didn't ask about who was common. Tell me about, did you make any friends? Was there anybody that were like you? They say, who's different? And let's look at, and let's pinpoint on that person. It's very interesting how we face that every day. The Canadian population is filled with foreign-born individuals. So we need to be more inclusive and stop calling people by their race or by their gender, or by like, a girl is a girl. Why do we have to say, "Oh, look at the Chinese girl over there"? We don't have to say that. If it was a white girl walking across the street, we would not say, "Look at the white girl." Why do we have to say it's a Chinese girl? It's just a girl. It's as anybody else.
I'm not sure, Natalie. I'm a black woman, and I'm okay if there's a crowd of people, like I'll say to somebody that I'm meeting for coffee, for example, a networking thing where we've never met in person before, but we've spoken on the phone and we've arranged to meet for coffee. I mentor a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so if we're connected through somebody else and we agree to meet for coffee, I'll say, "Well, I'll meet you at such and such a coffee place, and I'm a tall black woman," so that they recognize me coming in.
That's
like you would say, "I'm coming in, I've got long blonde hair."
Yeah.
Now you wouldn't refer to yourself as white, but you would describe yourself. And so I say I'm a tall black woman. I am.
You are. Okay, so that's okay.
My best friend is Chinese.
Yeah.
She's different than me. She's a different race than me. And she's my maid of honor, best friend in the world. But she's Chinese. Her family's Chinese. I call her up when it's the Chinese New Year, and I'll say something to her, or but that's an identifier. That's a physical identifier that She's proud of her Chinese heritage. I'm happy to be a Black woman. Wasn't always, but I certainly am now.
It's very interesting. I'm glad you're saying this because I have went to a few conferences. One that we were both at with Tina Varugese, and then she said she was the conference was called 50 Shades of Beige, and she was saying stop asking people where they're from because they have
Yes,
a different background. They have a different color of their skin. We think that it's a conversation starter. We're at a cocktail party, we don't know somebody, and then we approach somebody, and instead of talking about the weather, that's what you would do if you met another white person. But because we
mhm,
meet a person that has another skin color, we would say, so where are you from? Well, I'm Canadian.
exactly.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
from, you know.
that was on my list.
Oh, you did. Oh, sorry.
Because it's like, no, I'm saying, I'm glad you mentioned, like, where am I from? Well, my mother's probably third, fourth generation Canadian, and my father's sixth generation Canadian. So I'd say Canada.
Yeah.
What do you mean, where am I from? Well, no, your background. I said, I just told you, like six generations Canadian from Nova Scotia. So then I have to say, well, okay. So my father's family came up through the Underground Railroad, ended up in Nova Scotia, where they've lived for hundreds of years. you know, how long have you been in Canada? Where are your people from?
Exactly.
That bothers me when people say your people.
Uh,
Where are your people from? So I will.
so that's a no-no. So don't ask people where they're from because it don't assume that because they have a different color skin that they're from somewhere else than you, and they're more likely like people that live here have been here longer than I've been because I'm French, like I said.
Yeah. and and how often would if somebody comes in with an accent,
Yeah.
um a strong accent, I will ask, oh, what is your accent?
Yes.
I'm not really good at telling accents. French, yes, I married a francophone, a French Canadian, so I recognize the French accent. But I've said to some people, oh, are you Australian? And they'll be like, no, I'm from New Zealand. It's a different country. They're proud of it. Somebody from, oh, are you Irish? No, I'm Scottish. I told you I'm not good with accents. People are proud of their heritage.
Yeah.
But my heritage is Canadian. So, and I am proud of that. My heritage is Black Canadian who've been here for generations and generations. You started off today's broadcast by speaking about the fact that you thought hoped that after Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or, that racism had been eradicated. Well, slavery ended like hundreds of years ago, but it lasted for 400 years. And that created an environment that just continued. And it still, I shouldn't use the word just, it continued, and it still continues to this day. It's just so much a part of our everyday lives. I wrote down some other things because I don't want to not address what people can do. So
Yes.
I recognize the time. So what can people do? Number one, acknowledge your own bias. Don't kid yourself to say, I am not biased or I'm not racist. Let's start with the fact that the majority of people, myself included, if we've been in society in North America, we have some thoughts that are based in racism. They just are, because that's how we were raised. And I don't mean blatantly not liking people. I mean taking a second look or wondering how they're different or assuming they're different. It's just there.
I have one of my friend that is the best dressed guy ever. Always to the T, the shoes, the fashion, always very, very nicely dressed, and with nice shirts and button up, um, and I asked him once, not asked him, but just commented, and said, "Oh my gosh, you got the prize for the best dressed guy ever. Like you always, like even when we go somewhere really informal, everybody's wearing jeans and t-shirts, he's dressed up." And I said, "You're always dressed up." He said, "Natalie, I don't have a choice." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm black." He said,
Mm-hmm.
"If I show up in jeans and t-shirts like everybody else, people won't respect me."
Yep.
Is that I don't have a choice. And it really, I really acknowledged that it was true. I have my own bias as well. And for the way somebody is dressed will influence what I will think of them professionally, or their worth, or their, like it's very interesting. And I recognize that I did have appreciation for the way he was always well dressed. And I had no clue that the intention behind his behavior of doing this was because he felt like he had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know me, you know I love renovating. I'm painting, gardening, building something. I wear work boots and, you know, I love that. I ran out to the grocery store, and we're talking maybe within the last 3 years. Ran to the grocery store, and I was in messy yard working clothes
Yeah.
just to get something. It was a no frills, and it's in a not affluent neighborhood. But there were many people in line, and I only had a few things. As I'm waiting in line, people are paying, you know, with their debit cards and things. And before I got to the cashier, this is pre-COVID stuff. Before I got to the cashier, there was maybe one person in front of me and then the one checking through. The cashier called the manager, and she said a code of some sort. Like she said, you know, manager to till such and such for code 7, whatever. So as the next person went up, the manager saunters over and stands beside the cashier, and nothing was said to him, like between the two of them. And then as I get up, he says, she's checking my groceries through, and he's standing there looking at me like, hello. And I'm going,
Hi.
is there something wrong? And he says, well, just give it to me. I'm like, give you what? He said, your check. I'm like, what do you know? I at the time was practicing law full time, very known and prominent in our community, and you know, proud to be a lawyer. And he says, your welfare check. And I said, pardon me. And he goes, well, don't you need me to sign the back of it so you can buy your groceries?
Oh.
And I said, oh, sorry. I reached in my wallet, pulled out my business card. I wasn't a lawyer at a firm. I owned the firm. I just pulled out my business card, put it down, and walked out. Left all my groceries there. I'm like, no.
No.
And I was like, that was a stereotype that was only because I was a Black person standing in line. Well, to his credit, and I still shop there, he phoned me and apologized. And he said, I need to have some training with my staff so that they don't make assumptions like that, and I'm sorry. Well, yeah. That's what it takes. So if you want to know what to do, is number one, recognize when you make assumptions about people because of their race, and then do something about it. Don't pretend you don't have these biases. So that was the first one, acknowledge your own biases.
Yes.
Second one is learn. And that's learn about what the problems really are. The problems are not limited to being attacked on video by police, because you know the country, North America, is outraged. The world is outraged, but it happens so often. I just received a list yesterday of how many times, and I was ashamed to say, because I love Winnipeg, how many times it happened in Winnipeg, or in Manitoba, I mean. But I received a list of the number of deaths in the past 10 years that were very, very similar to what we saw on the video.
So it's
And
not
so,
because it was not happening, it's because it was not videotaped.
exactly.
We didn't hear about it. The only reason why we know about this is because it was videotaped and broadcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you really want to help, learn about what's been going on in your own community. And then the second part of learn is learn about white privilege. I didn't even know to what extent white privilege was prevalent. Like I do, yes, but my husband gave me this article yesterday about, unfortunately, they call it a Karen, and that's just the name. Stop being a Karen. And Karen is, that's what I didn't know, is the name that is used for a woman of white privilege. And this article went on to say, for those unfamiliar with this term, a Karen is a middle-aged white woman who sails through life on a current of good fortune, unaware of the ways that her whiteness smooths the waters around her. If you told her, she would be stunned because she sees herself simply as a kind, caring person. However, she wouldn't think twice about calling the manager if she didn't like her meal. Whereas that's not something most racial minorities would do. You know, and we saw most blatantly, and then the article goes on to say, and I ask other people, if you want to learn, then go educate yourself. Google it now. You don't have to go to the library and study. Google it, instances of racism. You know, what is a quote Karen or white privilege, those types of things. So you can see all the examples. There are so many that will help with the awareness of what it really is and what people are referring to. Another thing people can do is, because I want to go quickly, is to speak up. And that's very hard. It is very, very hard. A friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, who I've known since the age of 9, said to me one time, I was on a friend's boat. Actually, they had lent me the boat after I got my captain's license. So I'm on this boat, and it was docked here in Barrie, but I'm laying on the bow with some girlfriends, drinking wine in our bikinis, just having fun with some girls. It was a very privileged lifestyle. And a friend of mine came up and joined us. And then she said, you might want to put a t-shirt on, Rose. I'm like, why? She goes, well, you're getting really dark. You don't want to make it worse. And this is someone I've known since I was 9. That's my husband. Renovations, if you heard that bang.
Oh, that's all. So your friend that you've known since
and I'm just like, I'm having a good time. Everyone else is having a good time. Yes, I'm the only Black person on the boat. Yes, I'm the host of this little soiree because I have the boat for the weekend.
You're the captain.
I didn't say anything. I was the captain of that ship.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything because I don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable.
So do you feel that because she's your friend since you were 9, she has seen the hardship that you had to go through, and it was in a caring way, and yet very outrageous to say? Do you feel it came?
She loves me dearly. She was actually even a roommate in college. No, she wasn't doing it. Yes, she was doing it in a caring way because she doesn't want other people to bother me about the darkness, because I'm, you know, I have other people who say I'm not that Black because I'm fairer skinned than some Black people. Well, too bad. I'm Black, you know.
Yeah.
Part of it was her own perception. And so, you know, it's not so much what she said or why she said it, because that's just an example of what I hear all the time.
Yes.
So it's this, what I'm saying isn't about her. It's about what did I do when confronted with that comment? Well, I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to make a scene. So I did nothing. Now, this was years ago. I'd say 15, probably 20 years ago. I was in my early 30s. So now, if that same situation were to happen exactly, I'm a different person. I'm a stronger person, and I would say something. But back then, I didn't. Again, I didn't want to be a bother.
So
So speak up.
speak up.
Speak up.
Speak
Don't
up
get
in a way.
angry.
You don't have
Don't.
to be the victim to speak up. You don't have to be. So maybe whenever you witness something as well, even as an observer, speak up as well, right? Like if you see something else happening, not just if you are in the position of receiving the comment. If you hear a friend comment over about something else, or speak
Yeah.
up, because
Speak up.
speak up.
And speak up in a polite, intelligent manner. It's not about getting angry. It's not about humiliating the other person.
Yeah,
It's about educating
it's
people.
education. Yeah.
And admit to yourself, do I ever have those thoughts? Like, people have said to me, you're not that black, or you're not that dark. I'm like, why are they saying that? Are they trying to make me feel better? Do they think if I were darker, that would be a more negative thing? And if so, then they need to check their own thinking, because that's common, and that's common for a lot of people.
Yes.
Show up is the next one. So I've said acknowledge, learn, speak up, and show up. It's easy to not show up. There are protests going on right now. I spoke to our son in Montreal yesterday. There were 10,000 people who showed up in Montreal for the protest there. It was very peaceful, and people were social distancing, which I can only imagine would be pretty difficult with 10,000 people. So right now is the perfect opportunity to say, I'm not going to show up because of social distancing. And I call bullshit, because reality is you wouldn't have shown up anyhow, because I have to work, or I have to this, or I have to that. But tomorrow, here in the city of Barrie, tomorrow at 5 p.m., there's a formal protest going on. And I'm thinking, well, but I've got my book club at 6:30, so it's not convenient. And then I thought, holy crap, Rose, show up. Like, walk the talk. So I'm going to text the people in the book club and say I'll be there at 7.
Be late.
But I'll be late. And I'm the one in charge of the Zoom call, because we have to do our book club by Zoom. So my husband's going to set it up at 6:30 and get it ready. And he'll be at the protest too, but he'll leave earlier than I will to set up the Zoom call. But show up. And I actually thought, but I don't want people to think I'm an activist, because I've never been an activist. And I'm going, but I do want people to know that I'm a proud Black woman.
Yeah.
So I do need to show up. And I posted 3 days ago, I think it was Sunday, a new profile picture, because I had an animated picture, and it wasn't of me, it was of a face, but it was sort of an artistic rendering. So it wasn't me. And I thought, with everything going on, I should put my face back on my Facebook profile picture.
Yeah.
And so I did. And then I put a picture, the banner, I put my siblings, because I have a lot of siblings. I did indicate that my mother had 3 daughters, so all 3 of us have Black fathers, not the same Black father. But eventually, at the age of 28, I met my biological father from Truro, and 11 more siblings.
Wow.
So I have an amazing paternal family, and we're super, super close. I also have my foster family that I grew up with in Simcoe County, who are Caucasian. So I have 3 families, a Black family, a white family, and a mixed family. Like, talk about an unusual situation.
This is very unusual. You've seen
it all, lived it all. These are my family members. And yet they didn't meet until I was 44 years old at my wedding.
At your wedding?
As the first time they all got together. Not that there was going to be any tensions or anything, but it was just different. It's hard to explain. That's a whole other conversation we'll have sometime. But showing up and being proud of being a Black person. Some of my sisters and brothers on my father's side are lighter skin than me, and some have darker skin than me. Doesn't change anything. But notice in your minds, I say to all of your viewers, notice in your minds, like, what do you think when you see someone who's really, really dark versus somebody who's a lighter shade of Black? Notice that, and then be kind to yourself. Say, oh, I do have these ingrained perceptions. I wasn't aware of that. I need to start noticing, acknowledge it.
Knowledge.
Because if you don't acknowledge it, that's how problems persist.
And then learn, and then speak up, and then
show up. So there are protests going on right now. There are things happening, and actually show up. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, a little difficult. I cannot tell you how many texts, emails, phone calls, PMs that I've received. What can I do, Rose? How are you doing, etc. And, you know, these are the things. This is my answer. I'll be posting it on my Facebook page. So please, I post it public so everyone can see it. Go check it out, Rose Adams. Create a new habit. And that's a little bit of a longer conversation, but habits take a long time to create. Yes. So don't think that you can be aware of racism for the next week or two and then fall back into just regular life. Stay aware. Do things so that it becomes a habit, so you notice it. And in any personal development, that's where, like coaching with people and courses, you do it yourself. One of the first things that we do, my husband and I work now with the personal development aspect of, I should mention the up factor.
The up factor.
Yes, elevating your life, your career, and your relationship, but you know, just taking your life to the next level. So that's my business. Acknowledge, notice, be aware, because that's the first step to change, is awareness. And then lead by example.
You were talking about creating a new habit, that it takes time.
Right.
Neural pathways are created in our brain, and they're just little fingers like this, that every single time you get awareness and things that are happening right now, the little neurons are touching, right? And they're touching another time, and then they get closer, and eventually it will form a synapse, like a strong connection that creates the new pathway towards your habit. So you want this pathway to get built solid and firm, because it's very, let's say you're in a house with cornfields around your house. Right now, when you come out, there's one path, and the path leads to your unconscious bias. So when you start pushing on the corn, it bounces back. So you have to go a second time so that the corn actually breaks. And then you have to go a third time so that the corn flattens out. And eventually it will become a path. The other path is still there. So that's why we have some relapse sometimes towards our old unconscious bias, because the other path is still there. However, when this new path becomes the one that you go the most frequently, that's when it becomes a habit. It takes at least 2 to 3 months of thinking a certain way. And when we see all the instances that happen to us, that could mean that 3 months of a habit, let's say you want to start exercising, you could do that every day for 3 months. But we don't have instances every day of witnessing social differences. So it needs to happen for years of
Yes.
choosing consciously the right path in order for this new cornfield to be flattened out enough. And eventually, if you never go back to the other path, the wind will take, and the seeds and the sun and nature will take its course, and something else will grow into the old path that you used to have. But it takes years. So we need to start today. It's an urgency, it's an emergency right now. We we cannot let this be just another instance. It snowballed for a reason. It snowballed during COVID-19. I don't know that if the universe had planned this, I don't know if it would not be a better time, because right now we are back to our roots. COVID has done that. We came back to appreciating our homes, our friendships, being close to the people, not buying stuff that we don't need, and not living in a world that is so busy and stressful and corporate. Now we're back to our roots, and maybe we are in the better shape of our life right now, mentally, to be able to do something about this at last, and make this maybe the year where everything changes for good. It needs to. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the small shifts. So first of all, I'm going to steal your analogy. I love metaphors and analogies, and I love that. So with your permission, I'll get your permission later. But the description of the cornfield, because we talk about it, you and I had this conversation the other day, just about how long it takes our subconscious mind to create new ways of thinking, new beliefs, and to let go of limiting beliefs. Well, I also agree with you 100%, Natalie, that this isn't a coincidence. The fact that we are in such a raw state, everybody's emotions are raw right now because we've been sort of in lockdown for almost 3 months, and we're on edge, and we're just, when you're raw, that's actually the best time to change, because your feelings and emotions are so close to the surface. So this is the best time for us to change. Like you said, getting back to what's really important in our lives. But the awareness and noticing, when I ask people to notice, it's going to take a long time. So your example of right now, because this isn't something that we can go and practice every day, it's going to take years. Absolutely. But if we start now, it's just that one little step in a different direction, which people think it makes no difference. But that one little step, if we keep going that way, the difference is huge. And that's what we need to do. And I'm open to conversations. I'm not an expert in how to fix this problem. This problem has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah, nobody.
But I'm an expert on my life, and I'm an expert on my experiences, and I'm an expert on my feelings. And I'm happy to share any and all of that. And I'm also happy to have conversations with other people who have experienced racism, and that's also going on behind the scenes with friends calling and things like that. And it's exciting. For me, it's exciting, but at the same time, I posted something today that I have my own bias, and my own bias is like, yeah, sure. You're asking how we can help. Those are just words. Do I really believe that even some of the people closest to me are actually going to make the difficult changes? I'd like to say yes, but I'm going to encourage them and support them and wait and see.
Yes. One conversation at a time. It's one person at a time. There could be one tip that I could give you. It takes a long time, and Rose and I do similar kind of work. I work with my clients at an unconscious level to help them reprogram their limiting belief. It's neuroscience. So to be changing something at an unconscious level, let's say your GPS has been scheduled and programmed to go one way for your whole life. With a car GPS, you push a button and then you change the address and then you go the other way. That's easy. In order to do that yourself at a logical level, it's not that easy. So one thing that you can do today is a two-step technique that I will give you right now that you can help get the process started. So first step is anytime you have one of these thoughts in your head that you're not proud of, first step is to talk about it in the past using the formula I used to. So when you hear something that you're not happy with, just say, wait, I used to think that. And now you follow it up with a step 2, progressive statement. So progressive statement starts with, I am willing to learn. I'm in the process of. So let's say that one of the big common limiting belief that I found myself guilty of, especially because I'll tell you a story. Maybe I'll tell you a story now of something that happened that was very comical that day, because we are all sitting at a coffee shop and it's in front of the gym. So we're sitting outside and then this woman comes in and then she parks the car. You know, the lines are diagonal like this, and you're supposed to park like this. She parks straight on. And then she comes out of the car and she looks at the line. She goes back in, she comes out, she parks again, and then she goes out, she comes back in, she parks again. And then she ends up being like completely reversed. It was a very bad parking job and she tried many times and we're all witnessing this and it's very funny. So one lady that was sitting at the coffee shop on the table beside us, the lady comes out and it's a white Caucasian woman, and the lady that is sitting at the table beside us yells, "You drive like a Chinese woman." So because it's a limiting belief here, there's a lot of Asian people that when you see somebody that doesn't drive well or doesn't park well or drives slow or whatever, they must be Chinese. Like it's a limiting belief. And I remember being very, I don't know if I can say that I'm dumb in that department, but I didn't know that it was a limiting belief out there. And that day I learned that, because I said, why is everybody laughing? Why is that funny? And then people at the table had to explain to me that there is a thing that Chinese people would not drive very well. And then I started laughing, like, oh, that's funny because the lady that said that is Chinese. That's why it was so funny, because the lady that said that, she was Asian. So that's why it was super funny. And since then, I created a limiting belief. And now when I would notice somebody that would not drive well or park well, I would look and say, sure enough, that person is Chinese. That must be true then. And it created this limiting belief, and I started to observe and notice. So now I'm guilty of having this limiting belief that because of their race, they must not be driving well. Like, it's ridiculous. So when you hear yourself say that, you have to say, wait a minute, what did I just hear in my head? This is not okay. I used to believe that because they were Chinese, they would not drive well. Now I'm willing to change that. I'm willing to learn how it feels to see everybody equally. I'm willing to change the way I've been processing my thoughts. So we need to go through the process and catch ourselves and change our limiting belief as soon as we hear them.
Yes, and that's a fabulous example, because number one, you may need to then start noticing drivers, and when you see a Chinese person driving well, say to yourself, see, there's another example where that limiting belief is wrong.
Exactly.
That's work. That takes work. Now you're driving, you're not going out of your way, but you notice, and to re-establish the new belief in your mind. The second thing is that that was planted in you through no fault of your own by this well-meaning Chinese woman making the comment. And we all do that. We all perpetuate stereotypes. When I said acknowledge your own biases, that's because we all do it. We just don't realize how often we do it.
Yeah.
And is it okay that it was said because she's Chinese? Well, I can easily say she wasn't doing it because she was against Chinese people.
No.
But was it okay? Not really.
No, it's not.
It perpetuates a stereotype, and it's the stereotype that then perpetuates the bias, and it's the bias that then perpetuates racism.
Yeah.
So it's a slippery slope.
Even if you're just joking, find something else to be funny about. Yeah. Even if you just want to make people laugh, there are many ways to make people laugh other than disgrading anybody. And you know how sometimes you want to make a joke about anything, not even if it's not race related. You just want to do a blonde jokes, right? Or whatever.
Yep.
It's not funny. Even if you want to be funny, there are so many ways you could be hilarious. You could be hilarious with words, with many things. You don't have to be funny about, like, let's completely erase these jokes from the internet, from it's not funny to share something online that you see and you're like, oh, it was just funny, I wanted to share that. If it is disgrading, just speak up. Like Rose said, speak up and tell the person, take this post down, it's very offensive.
And it might not be very offensive, but slightly offensive is still offensive. And that's adds up. Exactly.
Creating these stereotypes. Absolutely.
And our North American sense of humor, I can't speak for other continents or countries because I haven't lived there, but I know that our sense of humor is often predicated upon humiliating other people.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we find funny. Are we all of a sudden going to not find it funny? Of course not. But we can, as you said, change what we perceive to be humor. And it's all these little tiny subtle ways. That's how we get to the root problem and deal with racism. Now, I haven't gone into the systemic racism and the at the police level and all that stuff, because my goal is the individual.
Yes.
Because I firmly believe that when the individual changes inside them, eventually the society will change. And then government and police and all these other authority type positions will no longer be able to remain the way they are. So it's not about, well, let's just change the police force and change their training. No. Change yourself.
It starts with you.
Starts with you.
It starts with us. It starts with our own life. What can we do every day to acknowledge, learn, speak up, show up, and create new habits?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Rose Adams from the Up Factor. So Rose, where could people get a hold of you? Through your Facebook page or?
Through my Facebook page or rose@roseadams.com.
Perfect. And my name is Natalie Plamondon-Thomas, and you can get a hold of me at Natalie with an H at thinkyourself.com or through the Think Yourself Academy page. So I'm usually live every Wednesdays at 7 a.m. and it was an absolute pleasure to be chatting with Rose Adams today. Thank you so much for your time and your generosity and all your advices. Those are tools that I will start practicing right away. And my next task right after this, I'm going to go Google to learn more about what's been going on in my neighborhood, what's happening here. Is there any events that are happening here where I can show up? And thank you for enlightening us, Rose.
Thank you. Namaste.